Fill your summer with the sun-kissed sweetness of Amigos Refreshers. There's strawberry acai, blueberry dragon fruit, and mango passion fruit, each a tropical delight. So skip the hot coffee and amp up your day with the plant-based natural caffeine and fruity flavor fusions in an Amigos Refresher. These cool thirst quenchers are just $3.99, or there's a Mega 32-ounce size for $4.99. Recharge with the bold, fresh flavor of an energizing refresher at Amigos.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I'm Kemper Donovan.
I'm Catherine Brobeck.
And this week we are discussing another Christie short story, another Poirot from the Poirot Investigates collection, The Adventure of the Italian Nobleman. First published in The Sketch on the 24th of October, 1923. So let's just get right into it. Our victim is a gentleman named Count Foscatini, who is a patient of one Dr. Hawker and a resident of Regent's Court. And the Count apparently calls Hawker as he lays dying, only to be found shortly thereafter, already deceased from a hard whack over the head. And the people who are discovering the body are not just Hawker, but our old friends, Poirot and Hastings.
Who are the suspects who may have whacked this gentleman over the head? Well, the primary suspect is one Signor Paolo Ascanio.
Paolo Ascanio.
He's an Italian diplomat. And he was seen at the Count's flat the day before, where he was apparently involved in a very terse conversation, seemingly involving money, with the Count.
Right. So our next suspect is a young Italian man who was with Signor Ascanio at the Count's flat during that terse conversation and who has now vanished.
We don't really ever learn more about him either.
And that's about it. Yeah. So that's that guy.
In case anyone was wondering. And then finally, we also have Graves, who is the Count's manservant. I guess he's somewhere between a valet, a butler, and a private secretary, somewhere.
He's kind of like the male version of a maid of all work.
Right.
People who aren't super rich have just one servant, and they call it a maid of all work, but it's a dude. A dude of all work.
Yes, so that's our friend Graves. He left the flat after he saw this dinner party of Italians in. And he's gone off to the music hall with a friend of his. And he happens to come back to the flat while Poirot and Hastings and Hawker, and I think at that point Scotland Yard, are all crowded on in examining his dead boss.
Yes. So how did we get to this scene with the dead body and everyone crowded around it? This is the world as it appears to be. Poirot, Hastings, and Hawker are friends. Hawker is a casual friend of Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, and they're having dinner together.
He's apparently a huge fan of Poirot's also.
Yeah, he's a big, which I'm sure helps with the friendship, because I think Monsieur Poirot is the kind of person who likes when his friends admire him and make frequent mention of said admiration.
Who doesn't?
I believe they're talking about arsenical poisoning. That's just the cheery little chatty topic they're talking about when Dr. Hawker's horrified housekeeper runs into Poirot's flat and informs the doctor that he received this breathless call wherein a man whose name she can't quite catch, but Hawker realizes she means Foscatini, he told her to send for the doctor as he was dying. And in fact, what he said is, "Doctor, help, they've killed me."
Very dramatic reading. Thanks.
Thank you.
Slow clap.
Renaissance bow.
Hawker is obviously going to run off to check on his apparently dying patient, but he does take the time to look sort of longingly at Poirot. And Poirot's like, "I know what you're thinking." And he and Hastings obviously come along. So they arrive, they get let into the flat by the building's management, and of course, the Count is quite dead.
Well, and Hawker even says he's so dead that Hawker is surprised that this man who just got whacked on the head even had time to call for help. And it seemed as if it would have been instantaneous. So that was a curious little beat within the story.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
He replaced the phone on the receiver, too.
Right. So he was apparently, for a man with a grievous head injury, he had a lot of know-how. Do you ever remember Massive Head Wound Harry on Saturday Night Live?
No.
It was this random skit on 80s Saturday Night Live. One of the cast members would just play a man who had a massive head wound, and that was it.
Welcome once again to Massive Head Wound Harry. Tonight's episode, The Cocktail Party.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I did not know that. The more you know. So they called Scotland Yard, and so everybody essentially takes a tour of the flat to make sure, I guess, that these mysterious Italians are not, like, hiding somewhere in there.
Not lurking, as mysterious Italians tend to do. Yeah.
Poirot does not join. Poirot just stands in the dining room, sort of just staring at the scene. So what we know from what Poirot is staring at is that there is a dining room table with place settings for 3. 3 meals have been taken. 2 cigarettes have been smoked. 1 cigar has been inhaled, and both port and coffee were also consumed. And also, we know that there's a dumbwaiter. Apparently, Regent's Court is very fancy because instead of, like, having room service, they just, like, run it up and down the dumbwaiter for you so you don't ever have to deal with a person.
Yeah, which I feel like in 1923 was practically Jetsons level technology.
I think it's Jetsons level technology now.
I know. I mean, that would be pretty cool.
I was reading that and I was like, wow.
I have to be like, beep, boop, boop. Please give me my dinner from the kitchen on the roof of this building, and I just slide open my little window and it's sitting there on a dumbwaiter. Not the first time that Christie has had a dumbwaiter figure into her mysteries. I believe in the Cheap Flat. Wasn't there some dumbwaiter funny business?
Hastings and Poirot break into the apartment by riding the dumbwaiter.
Right. Anyway, Poirot focuses on that dining room table and the spread of food there for quite a long time. And I think we mentioned this in our last episode. Whenever Monsieur Poirot is focusing on something, the reader should focus on it as well. So that will be important. But in any case, Scotland Yard discovers from a horrified Graves, that's the manservant who has returned from his night of music, that the Count had in fact been meeting with 2 Italian men for dinner. The same 2 Italian men who he had met the day earlier. And while no one at Regent's Court can bear witness to what those men looked like, Graves knows that the man in question is this Paolo Ascanio. So naturally, Scotland Yard takes him to be the murderer. They hunt him down before he can embark on a ship to the continent, and they arrest him. But alas, Signor Ascanio has an alibi, an airtight alibi having to do with a high-ranking Italian diplomat in London. So we have ourselves a mystery here, and it looks like no one can solve it except for one Hercule Poirot.
Indeed, and solve it he does.
Tell us about the world as it actually is, Catherine.
Well, there's always a method for our deal Hercule. And here is a crime which requires so much in the way of method. I mean, just really a lot.
Maybe a little too much?
Well, in fact, too much to the point where it undoes itself. The fact that there's too much essentially ruins the crime.
Explain.
All right, so we have only really a few clues. This is a pretty short story. I think you can sum it up to say that there's really only one clue, and it's the dining room.
Right.
But within the dining room, clue number 1, there are the windows. And what is it you say about the windows? Well, you can see the windows. And why might that be a problem? Well, because it's nighttime.
Right.
And so...
Meaning the curtains weren't drawn.
No, the curtains were not drawn, and it's June, so the sun would have gone down rather late anyway, but we know that the call to Dr. Hawker was made at 8:47, and that's also the same time that the clock in the room was smashed from when the Count died. And at 8:47, June or not, the sun would have been down and the curtains would have been drawn.
Right.
So I'm curious, right? Why would you be having dinner and not have drawn the curtains after it became dark?
Right. It's like the dinner would have started when it was still light out, but it would have gotten increasingly dark and then gotten to the point of being pitch black during the dinner and toward the end of it. And the natural course of events would be for, those curtains to be drawn, because it would just be uncomfortable to be in a fully lit dining room and be looking out an open window.
Unless they really, really wanted to set a tableau for the street below or anybody who could look into the apartment.
Sure, maybe they were exhibitionists. Possibly. So that's one clue. That's curious. Then a second clue is the food itself. We mentioned that there were 3 place settings and that the entree had been consumed, but we do get this information from the chef or like the wait staff in the restaurant of the apartment that the rice soufflé, which was the dessert, was not eaten by any of them. So of the 3 dinners that were sent down, it was a full dinner, which includes several courses plus this dessert. And I believe there was also a bowl of fruit that was on the table. Mm-hmm. None of that fruit had been eaten either. So the uneaten fruit paired with the uneaten rice souffle is just curious, given the fact that the dinner was entirely eaten. So why did no one eat dessert? Because everyone knows dessert is the best part of the meal.
I'm like the one person who never orders dessert.
Oh, Catherine. Let's talk about the coffee.
So our third clue is...
my least favorite clue, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty dumb clue because you could also, weirdly enough, make the same case for the port.
Right, that's true.
Nobody makes a comment about the port because basically the clue here is that when they lift the Count up, we see his olive-tanned complexion and his luxurious black mustache and his gleamingly perfect white teeth.
Right.
In other words, if he had been downing coffee, which was in fact all consumed at the table, you'd think that his teeth would have some sort of coffee grime on them. And that's suspicious. But again, this is like, I think, an error because nobody says anything about the port. And port is like heavy wine. If anything's going to stain your mouth, it's probably the port as much as it is the coffee.
And I just don't think coffee actually stains your teeth that severely that you would necessarily be able to pick up on it an hour or so later. I don't know. To me, this clue is stretching.
No, well, it is because as somebody who's familiar with drinking both a lot of coffee and with having consumed red wine, yeah, if you were a constant coffee drinker, it's going to change the color of your teeth
over time.
But over time. But if you have a glass, if you have a cup of coffee, it's not going to be any more noticeable than the wine because the wine stains much faster.
Agreed.
Yeah, so it's a really weird clue, but it is important in the context of the story, and the deduction that we can make from it is that he didn't drink the coffee, but yet somehow the coffee at his place setting has been consumed.
And by the way, we'll talk about the adaptation in a moment, but one of the things I liked about the adaptation is that they dispensed with the coffee clue. Mm-hmm. They clearly were not pleased with the coffee clue either. So there's a lot of funny business going on here with this meal. It's not as simple as 3 people sitting down to a dinner and enjoying their meal as we thought. So what is the resolution to this? The resolution is that there were no dinner guests. Poirot interviews Signor Ascanio after he's been released from custody because of his airtight alibi, and Ascanio admits that he had, in fact, been lying when he said that he had never been to the Count's flat. He had gone the day before with a bag o' money in order to pay off the Count, who was, in fact, not a Count, but a notorious blackmailer who the Italian government had to interact with in order to protect an aristocratic Italian from a blackmail scheme. So Ascanio was acting on behalf of the government, and he had handed off the money to this supposed Count the day before the murder, and that was that. So the Count, we now know, had a huge amount of cash on his person or in his flat the day of the murder, and that cash is something that he had only obtained the day before, and that is very significant because
Poirot determines that, in fact, if he'd had that conversation in the flat, guess who might have overheard that conversation?
His manservant?
Might have been the manservant.
Yeah.
So, in fact, Poirot figures that Graves had overheard all of that. He had seen the money transfer, and that he realized, because it was a secret meeting, that Ascanio would not be able to publicly say what had happened. So he put in motion a plot to steal the money and kill the Count and blame it on Ascanio, essentially, or at least assume that Scotland Yard would blame it on Ascanio.
Would blame it on Ascanio. So what Graves did is he killed the Count. He bashed him over the head. Then he ordered dinner to come via that nifty dumb waiter. Dinner for 3. He set the table for 3. He ate all of the food, which is kind of funny.
I mean,
he ate so much food that he couldn't possibly make it to the dessert course.
This is where this story just like sort of...
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is where we're getting into the territory of Alfred Inglethorpe. Rather than stuffing the spills in his pocket, putting them on the mantelpiece in the Mysterious Affair Styles. This is not a human acting like a human, because if I'm a murderer who has this plot to make it look like 3 people ate dinner, I'm going to throw out the food. I'm going to order the food, scrape it off the plates, eat what I can, I guess, and then take a little bag of some sort. They had bags in 1923. And then as I'm going to my little music hall thing to make it seem like it's a regular night for me, throw it in the trash somewhere.
Right. No, but instead...
Or burn it in the apartment. Anything.
Instead, he sits there and he eats all of it. He eats 3 people's meals.
and leaves the parts that he can't eat, and then sends it back so that the wait staff and the chef know exactly how much of it was eaten or not. It's just ridiculous.
Well, it gets more ridiculous because when he left, he makes the phone call to Hawker's housekeeper from a phone booth on the street. So, like, he's had time to go stop and find a phone booth and place this call from outside of the flat. But yet he spent all of this time sitting in the flat eating 3 people's meals.
Yeah.
No, it's ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. But Poirot tells Inspector Japp to check to see if anyone made a phone call at 8:47, which was the time of the murder that we get from the smashed clock, from Regent's Court, and of course no one did, because the call was actually coming from a phone booth. Although, as we're talking about this, I'm wondering, why couldn't Graves have just made the call from the flat?
Because he already had to leave.
Oh, he had to be seen leaving. Oh, he had to leave. Of course, he had to leave because he knew that they were going to come rushing over immediately, and he needed them to come rushing over immediately to make it seem like that murder had happened right then.
And he had to have been seen by the staff at Regent's Court having left.
Left. Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense. So the absence of a phone call having been made from Regent's Court is circumstantial evidence, but circumstantial evidence, if it's strong enough, can be used to convict a person. So based off of that, at least, Graves is arrested for murder, and we're told in no uncertain terms at the end of the story that is in fact what happened. Graves is guilty, and Poirot solved it again.
And Hastings is like, gosh darn it, Poirot was right yet again.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this one, to me, the story itself is very slight. It's a very short story. Mm-hmm. It rests on these rather shaky clues. There's not a lot of interesting characterization going on in the story. It certainly was not one of my favorites.
It's not really even that you could say that it's bad in any way. It's so short that
it's just slight.
Yeah,
it's slight rather than bad. It didn't offend me because there was hardly anything there to offend.
There's no there really, and it's just like, you can read it very quickly, and there's not really any investigation happening in it either.
Right. It's one of those, it's where the mystery puzzle element is really at the surface in a way that it never is in the novels, because in the novels, the characters are deeper and the story is just more complicated and there's a lot more going on. This one reminds me a little bit of the robbery at the Grand Metropolitan, which was so obviously just a logic puzzle. And this one also is a little bit, it's a little puzzle. It's a little puzzle to be solved. Can you figure your way through it? I don't think the actual figuring your way through the puzzle is totally fair, or it's just not as strong as it often is in these Christie puzzles, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I think that's what we can say about it. It's fine.
So the adaptation is better than fine because they add little elements to make it more fun, as especially in the first half of this series they so often did in the Suchet series, and this is in season 5, I believe. There are a couple of elements that at this point they've really established the characters in such a way that we're not surprised that Hastings is looking at buying a race car, because Hastings is just obsessed with cars. So there's a whole runner in which he's trying to buy these cars from these Italian people, and there's a funny little scene where he's dealing with the man at the car ownership, and he kind of just fobs him off onto this young, rather fetching woman. I think her name is Miss Fabry, and then she just busts out with all of this arcane knowledge of car mechanics and machinery, which kind of reminded me of Marissa Tomei and My Cousin Vinny.
Your Honor, I move to disqualify Ms. Vito as an expert witness.
Can you answer the question?
No, it is a trick question.
Why is it a trick question?
Watch this.
Because Chevy didn't make a 327 in 55. The 327 didn't come out till 62. And it wasn't offered in the Bel Air with a 4-barrel carb till 64. However, in 1964, the correct ignition timing would be 4 degrees before top dead center.
It's a really good movie.
Well, it's because Marissa Tomei is awesome.
Yeah, her performance is just truly Oscar-worthy.
Are you saying that they did not read the wrong name on the Oscar card?
I am, as we now know, when the wrong thing gets read on those cards, they let you know in the moment. So
Yeah.
Marissa Tomei has been vindicated once and for all. If there was nothing positive to come out of the La La Land Moonlight debacle, it is the vindication of Marissa Tomei and Jack Palance.
Yes. No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, but I agree that Miss Fabry does sort of have that quality to her.
Yeah, and Poirot is very amused by Hastings' surprise when she has all of this knowledge. Just a really slight exchange between Poirot and Hastings was also one of my favorites in a while.
What on earth's going on, Poirot? Hastings. Miss Lemon has an admirer.
No.
He's just completely flabbergasted. It's delightful.
Well, I don't know. Is it delightful or
It's
is
a
it
little
really
mean.
sad?
Everything with Miss Lemon in this episode is diverting, but a little mean-spirited, because one of Hastings' characteristics is that he loves race cars. One of Miss Lemon's characteristics is that she's a little sad.
I know. I mean, we've said this, not to make this episode a long sort of meditation on Miss Lemon, but we've talked in the past about how much we both love Miss Lemon. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I really did not remember until we began really going back, rewatching, and analyzing all of these, how sad Miss Lemon is.
She's really sad. So her new boyfriend is Graves, the man who did it, the manservant in the short story.
Murderer.
And not only
that, he lied about his job.
Yeah,
First off.
he told her that he was a private secretary, and then halfway through the episode, because Poirot and Hastings come upon the body and they see him, and he has to cop to being a manservant rather than a personal secretary, he tells Miss Lemon, and she, in a very woke sort of a way, acknowledges the fact that she probably wouldn't have given him the time of day if, when she met him, she knew that he was a manservant and not a private secretary. But she's not proud of that fact, and I thought that was quite impressive, that she had the self-awareness to know that about herself and to kind of move beyond it. And it seems like they're going to try to make it work, but oops, then he's the murderer.
Yeah, he's like the Tinder date from hell.
I wonder how they met. Maybe it was like the 20s version of Tinder, which is probably a bar. We do know that Miss Lemon frequents lots of seedy bars, so she's got contacts.
We've actually seen Miss Lemon do some investigative work, and some of it has involved her going into seedy bars, and I will also just note that Miss Lemon doesn't seem that uncomfortable in them.
No, it's true. And even to make matters worse than that, at the very end of the episode, first of all, Hastings punches out Graves and says, "You swine," and then punches him and says, "That's for Miss Lemon." And I believe when he punches him, he falls into a body of water because they needed to make it even that much more cartoony.
Of course.
Which is ridiculous, but Poirot...
Well, I mean, and let's also know that there's a chase. I mean, like...
There's another chase.
Trust our good friend Clive Exton to always add on a chase.
You got to insert a chase. At least it's a chase within a city and not on that backcountry road. And there was nary a truck backing up in this chase. Let's give credit where credit is due.
It's true. True story.
But after this is all done and Graves has been brought to justice, Poirot has to go in and explain to poor Miss Lemon what happened. But she ends up already being over Mr. Graves because after they reconciled and he had come clean about being a manservant and was wrapping up the affairs of his master, the dead Count, he informs Miss Lemon that he's just going to have the Count's cat, who had been living in the apartment, destroyed because there's nothing to do with the cat and he doesn't care, and it's within character of this guy because he obviously is a sociopath.
A murderer?
Murdering sociopath. So she's already over him because he was going to destroy a cat. So what did she do? She took in the cat, and the cat is now in Monsieur Poirot's flat, and the episode ends on Poirot's face looking at this cat, and he's
just horrified.
Horrified. And it's pretty funny, but it's like Miss Lemon doesn't even get to have the emotional catharsis of, oh my god, I was dating a murderer, because she's so emotionally stunted that all she really cares about is cats. She's a cat lady. They made her a cat lady, and it's all in there. It's in there. It's in all these episodes, and I just never saw it before, and it makes me a little sad. Not gonna lie.
I didn't either. I kind of always just saw Ms. Lemon as a sort of very composed, practical, smart, working woman, and not that she was an incredibly sad cat lady. And that's really the reality.
Yeah.
I mean, with very good eyebrows. Do not get me wrong.
Of course. There's also a lot of red herring intrigue going on with mafia-like Italian stuff, and it's... Oh,
I'm sorry, except it's not the mafia.
It's not the mafia.
It goes far, far further back than the mafia.
I already stopped listening.
There's an entire exchange where Hastings is like, oh, right, the mafia. And Poirot's like, no, Captain Hastings.
It's like, no, much worse and much more interesting than the mafia. I promise. To give Clive Exton credit, not only did he insert race cars and a chase scene and Miss Lemon as cat lady, but he did really improve on the clues. I thought it was a nice touch that there's this added clue where Ascanio's fingerprints are on one of the glasses at dinner. And the reason why that is, even though he was never at the dinner, is that he was in the flat the day before, and Graves actually saved a glass and put that glass on the table, and that makes Graves more crafty, and that's kind of cool. Like, I thought that was a good clue. And then we mentioned in the adaptation, they do a post-mortem on the body,
right?
And the body has no food in its stomach, so that's proof positive that the dinner wasn't eaten. And to me, that makes sense. I could see Graves craftily disposing of the food however he does, and then being thwarted in the end by a post-mortem in which, wait, there actually wasn't any recently eaten food. That makes sense to me. It's a little bit more procedural and less logic puzzle or mystery puzzle than what we have in Christie, but it doesn't strain credulity in the same way. So I thought they did a good job of fleshing out just the mystery puzzle structure and strengthening its bones a little bit in the adaptation.
They do what they can with it. Also, obviously, Jap is inserted into it in the way that he's not in the story.
It's really interesting, actually, that so often in these stories, Christie, I guess just for verisimilitude purposes, often has other Scotland Yard people or random police officers that are brought in on things, and then there will be a tangential reference to Japp, but Japp's not in them, because it would be ridiculous if Japp was in every single one, but they weren't in the ITV series.
In the adaptation, right?
And but my point is that it's for a good cause, because you want to have that crew in every single episode. Okay, well, that is the adventure of the Italian nobleman. Join us next week when we're back to our next novel, The Murder at the Vicarage. Yes, Miss Marple. Couldn't be more excited. In the meantime, please, as always, feel free to contact us. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at allaboutthedame@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at allaboutthedame. You can check in with us on Facebook at facebook.com/allaboutagatha. You can see us on Instagram at allaboutagatha. And please rate and review us on iTunes, as we would love to hear from you. We will talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.